The Accra night howled like a wounded beast when the billionaire's Mercedes screeched to a stop before his mansion gate. The rain came sideways, blinding, relentless. Through the blur of headlights, Chuka Okoro froze. There, slumped against the wall, was his mother, barefoot, trembling in a soaked nightgown. And beside her, a stranger. A thin, dark-skinned boy, barely 20, wrapping his frail arms around her, as if shielding life itself from the storm. "Mom, oh my God, Mom." Chuka's scream tore through the rain. He ran hard, hammering confusion and terror, twisting together. Why was his mother outside? Who was this boy holding her? And why did the sight feel like mercy and guilt at once? He didn't know that this night, this desperate act of kindness, would unravel secrets, rebuild broken hearts, and teach a man of wealth what it means to truly be rich. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story that proves kindness still saves lives. The rain had teeth that night in Accra. It didn't fall. It attacked, slicing through the air in silver streaks that blurred the edges of the world. Chuka Okoro gripped the steering wheel of his black Mercedes so tightly that his knuckles went white. The wipers fought uselessly against the downpour, and thunder rolled across the Atlantic like the wrath of something ancient. He should have been in London, still closing a billion CD deal that would seal his company's dominance across West Africa. But when his mother's trembling voice crackled through the phone the night before everything inside him had shifted, she'd called him Emeka, his father's name, for the third time that week. There had been confusion, fear, the sound of rain already falling in the background. And then silence. He had boarded the first flight back. Now, as the mansion loomed through the rain, 12,000 square feet of cold stone glass and empty echo, Chuka felt a dread he couldn't name. The security lights glowed automatically, indifferent to the chaos around them. The main gate responded to his remote control with mechanical precision, a sound he had once found reassuring. But tonight it grated against his nerves. Something was wrong. The pedestrian gate, a smaller side entrance meant for staff and visitors, hung slightly ajar. Its electronic lock blinked red, malfunctioning. Again, he had meant to call the repairman weeks ago. Then he saw them. Two figures at the base of the gate, barely visible at first, like shadows crawling through the storm. As his headlights swept over them, time fractured. His mother, Mama Ifeoma, sat slumped against the wall, her thin nightgown plastered to her fragile frame, her silver hair tangled and dripping. Her bare feet rested in a puddle blue from cold. But she wasn't alone. A boy, no, a young man, was kneeling beside her, arms wrapped around her shoulders. His skin glistened with rain, his body trembling violently. His face was half buried in her hair, as if trying to shield her from the world. "Mom." Chuka's voice broke as he flung open the car door. The storm swallowed him instantly, drenching his tailored coat and suit in seconds. "Mom, oh my God." He fell to his knees beside them. Mama Ifeoma's eyes fluttered open, cloudy, unfocused. "Emeka," she murmured, her voice small and lost. "Is it morning already?" Chuka's heart cracked. "It's me, Mama. It's Chuka. You're safe now." The young man beside her stirred. His eyes opened, dark, tired, filled with something Chuka hadn't seen in a long time, raw humanity. His lips were blue. His voice came out in broken fragments. "She was lost," he whispered. "I couldn't leave her." Then his eyes rolled back and he collapsed into Chuka's arms. For a second, the billionaire froze, caught between disbelief and panic. The boy's body was frighteningly cold, his pulse faint. He was dying. "Help!" Chuka shouted toward the security cameras that lined the walls. "Somebody get out here now." He tried to lift both of them, his mother and the stranger, but his strength faltered. Finally, his bodyguards came running from the guardhouse, faces pale in the flashing lightning. "Quick," he barked. "Blankets, call the ambulance now." As they worked, Chuka looked down at the boy again. His hands were blistered, his clothes torn, his shoes soaked through. A cheap woven bracelet clung to his wrist, its threads faded but intact. There was something sacred about it, a reminder that this boy came from somewhere real, somewhere life was harder than marble floors and chauffeurs. By the time the ambulance arrived, Chuka was shaking not from the cold but from guilt. He sat in the back of the vehicle beside his mother, holding her fragile hand. The paramedic checked her vitals. "Mild hypothermia," he said, "but she'll live." The young man, his conditions more critical. Chuka looked over. The boy, Tunde, he would later learn, lay still under a silver thermal blanket, an oxygen mask covering his mouth. The monitor beeped faintly. "Keep him alive," Chuka said. "Whatever it takes." The paramedic nodded, unaware that the billionaire meant every word like a prayer. By dawn, the storm had eased. The city of Accra stretched beneath the soft gray light like a tired survivor. At Korle Bu Teaching Hospital, Chuka paced outside the emergency ward. His clothes clung to him, his hair still wet, but he didn't care. His thoughts spiraled. Mama Ifioma had been found outside the gate of her own mansion. His mother, once a woman of grace, the daughter of a respected teacher from Kumasi, a woman who built her son's empire with her sacrifices, had wandered into the rain while he was halfway across the world counting profits. He should have been there. When the doctor emerged, Chuka straightened immediately. "How is she? She's stable," the doctor said. A little confused, but the hypothermia was mild. She was lucky whoever stayed with her through that storm kept her core temperature from dropping too far. And the boy, Chuka asked. The doctor hesitated. Severe hypothermia, but he's young and strong. If he makes it through the next few hours, he'll recover. Chuka exhaled, realizing he'd been holding his breath. "I want to pay for his treatment, everything he needs." The doctor smiled faintly. "You already have. Your assistant cleared the bills before we started." Inside the recovery room, the air smelled of antiseptic and rain-soaked clothes. Tunde lay asleep, tubes running from his arms, his chest rising and falling slowly. On the bedside table sat a small plastic bag containing his possessions, a torn wallet, a faded photograph of a woman and a piece of cloth, a blanket old and frayed, the kind only love could make valuable. Chuka picked it up carefully. It smelled faintly of smoke and rain. On it, stitched in uneven thread, were the words, "Be kind, my son." Something inside him cracked again. He sat beside the boy and whispered, "You saved her life. I don't even know your name, but you saved her." Outside the window, the morning sun broke through the clouds, washing the hospital walls in gold. The storm had passed, but its echo still lived in Chuka's chest, a reminder that money couldn't buy peace or time or second chances. He stayed there for hours until his mother woke in the next room, calling softly for the boy with kind eyes. And for the first time in years, Chuka prayed. Not for wealth, not for success, but for the stranger who had held his mother when he could not. Because somehow he knew this was not the end of their story. It was only the beginning. The smell of antiseptic clung to the hospital room like a ghost. Tunde opened his eyes to the ceiling fan, spinning slowly above him. For a long moment, he didn't know where he was. He only knew that his body ached, his lips were cracked, and his fingertips burned with a dull sting. Then he remembered the rain, the woman, the cold that felt like knives. And the last thing he saw, a pair of headlights cutting through the darkness, a man screaming for his mother. Now there was light. Real light. Warm. Safe. He tried to sit up, but pain spread across his ribs. A nurse hurried over. "Easy," she said gently. "You're at Korlebu Hospital. You've been unconscious for nearly a day. You saved that woman's life." Tunde blinked. "The old lady, she's okay." "She's recovering," the nurse smiled. "She keeps asking for the boy with kind eyes. That must be you." He wanted to smile, but his throat tightened instead. He looked down at the IV in his arm, the blanket over him, clean white, not the ragged one he'd wrapped around her. His heart twisted painfully. That blanket was all he had left of his mother. Before he could ask, the door opened. A man in a tailored navy suit stepped inside, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and controlled emotion. Tunde recognized him immediately, the man from the storm. "Mr. Okoro," the nurse said quietly, nodding before slipping out and closing the door. The silence that followed felt heavy, almost sacred. "You're awake," Chuka said finally, his voice low. "Good." Tunde tried to speak, but the words scraped his dry throat. Your mother, she's alive." Chuka interrupted softly. "Because of you." The billionaire moved closer, pulling up a chair. He looked nothing like the men Tunde had grown up around. His watch could have paid a year's rent. His cologne filled the air like quiet authority. Yet beneath all that polish, his eyes looked broken. "What's your name, Tunde?" the boy answered after a pause. "Tunde Afolayan." Chuka nodded slowly, as if memorizing it. "Tunde, I owe you more than I can repay." "You don't owe me," Tunde murmured. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Chuka said firmly. "They wouldn't have." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I saw the security footage. You stayed with her for hours. You gave her your coat, your blanket, your body heat, while the rest of this city slept. That wasn't luck, that was courage." Tunde looked away, embarrassed. She was cold. She was lost. You just refused to walk away." Chuka finished for him. Silence filled the room again, broken only by the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. Chuka stood and walked to the table where Tunde's few possessions had been placed in a small plastic tray. He picked up the worn blanket. "This was yours, wasn't it?" Tunde's breath caught. "Yes, sir. It belonged to my mother." She must have been an extraordinary woman, Chuka said. She was, Tunde whispered. She used to say you're never poor if you still have kindness. Chuka's eyes flickered. He folded the blanket carefully, almost reverently, and placed it beside the boy's pillow. You remind me of her, he said quietly, of the woman my mother used to be before sickness took her memories. For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain outside had stopped, leaving only the distant hum of Accra traffic. Finally, Chuka straightened his jacket. You'll stay here until you're strong again. I've already arranged everything with the doctors. I can't afford. I didn't ask if you could, Chuka interrupted gently. This isn't charity, it's gratitude. He hesitated before turning to the door. When you're discharged, there's a place for you at my house. A guest cottage, warm bed, real food. You'll stay there until you decide what's next. Tunde's mouth opened, but no sound came. No one had ever offered him home before, not since his mother's funeral. Why, he finally whispered. Chuka turned back, his face softening. Because you did what I didn't, you stayed. And then he was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of rain and a feeling Tunde hadn't known in years, hope. 2 days later, under the washed blue sky of Accra, Tunde stood outside Okoro Mansion, leaning on a walking stick the nurse had given him. The estate looked like something from a dream: white pillars, trimmed gardens, a fountain shaped like an angel pouring water into a marble basin. The gate guard, a burly man with a scar above his eyebrow, stepped aside respectfully. Boss said you should go straight to the house. As Tunde entered, he felt every gaze on him, the gardeners, the maids, the security men. Their curiosity pricked his skin. He wasn't supposed to be here, and everyone knew it. The front door opened before he reached it. Mama Ifeoma stood there wrapped in a thick shawl, her hair neatly braided, her eyes bright for the first time since that night. Tunde, she said, her voice trembling. You're real, he smiled shyly. I am Mama, and you look strong again. She reached for his hands, her touch warm despite the cool morning breeze. You stayed with me, she whispered. The angels must have sent you. Chuka appeared behind her, his expression softening at the sight. Mother, you should sit. I will, she said, but her gaze stayed on Tunde. Only after I thank him properly. She pressed her palm against his cheek. My son has many things, cars, houses, fame, but that night only your kindness mattered. Tunde swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Chuka gestured toward the side path. Come, I'll show you the guest house. They walked together through the manicured gardens. Birds chirped in the hibiscus trees. Somewhere far off, a generator hummed. The guest house stood at the back of the property, a small, clean bungalow with white curtains and a wooden porch. Tunde stepped inside. The smell of soap and new paint filled the air. A soft bed, a desk, a tiny bathroom, luxuries he hadn't known in years. I don't deserve this, he said quietly. You deserve far more than this, Chuka replied. You gave my family something I can never repay. He looked around the room, hands in his pockets. I used to think wealth meant security, but that night I saw how fragile everything really is. You reminded me. Tunde met his gaze. Money builds walls, sir. Kindness opens doors. Chuka smiled faintly. Then maybe you should help me learn how to open more doors. For the first time, Tunde laughed, a small, uncertain sound, but genuine. That evening dinner felt like stepping into another world. The dining room gleamed with golden chandeliers and polished wood. Mama Ifeoma sat at the head of the table, Chuka beside her, and across from them a bright-eyed girl of 10 with braids and dimples. Amara. When Tunde entered, Amara gasped. You're the hero, I'm not, Tunde stammered. You saved Grandma, she insisted. That makes you a hero, Mama Ifeoma chuckled softly. See, even the child knows truth when she hears it. Dinner was a blur of aromas: fufu, egusi soup, roasted tilapia. Tunde ate slowly, afraid to stain the white tablecloth. He had forgotten what it meant to be full. Halfway through the meal, Amara pointed to the harmonica poking out of his jacket pocket. Is that yours? Yes, Tunde said. It belonged to my mother. Play something, Mama Ifeoma urged. He hesitated. His fingers shook as he brought it to his lips. The first notes came out uncertain, then grew stronger, filling the dining room with the haunting melody of Amazing Grace. By the time he finished, the room was silent except for the soft drip of tears down Mama Ifeoma's cheeks. That she whispered was the sound of angels that night. Tunde lowered the harmonica voice, trembling. It was the sound of my mother's love, Mama. I think she would have liked you. Chuka reached across the table and placed a hand over Tunde's. She would have been proud of the man you are. Outside, the rain began again, gentler this time, like a blessing. And for the first time in a long time, Tunde didn't feel like a visitor. He felt home. The next morning, the sun over Accra shone too brightly for how heavy the house felt. Chuka Okoro stood by the wide window of his mother's sitting room, staring out at the manicured gardens that looked so peaceful they almost mocked him. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his mother lying barefoot in the storm. Her lips blue, her fragile frame pressed against that boy's body, that stranger's body. He still couldn't understand how it had happened. How could the most secure estate in Airport Residential let his mother wander out unnoticed? He had bodyguards, cameras, housekeepers, smart locks, all the things money was supposed to guarantee. Yet when the rain came, every system had failed. Every human had failed. And he, the son who built his empire across continents, had been thousands of miles away talking about expansion and market shares. Now here was this boy sleeping in his guest house like a ghost of mercy, a living reminder that a billionaire's protection meant nothing without presence. "Sir," the voice of patience, his longtime housekeeper pulled him from thought. "Madame Ifeoma is asking for breakfast in the garden." Chuka turned nodding. "And the boy, has he eaten?" Patience hesitated. "He said he'll wait, sir. He doesn't want to cause trouble." Chuka sighed. "He already caused a miracle. Make sure he eats." The garden smelled of hibiscus and earth still damp from the storm. Mama Ifeoma sat under the canopy wrapped in a blue shawl, her eyes clearer today, though the faraway haze still lingered behind them. When she saw her son approach, she smiled faintly. "My Chuka," she said, "you look tired." "I'm fine, Mama." He bent to kiss her forehead. "You weren't here," she murmured, looking past him toward the sky. "When the rain came, I was calling for you, but someone else came instead." "Yes," he said softly. "Tunda." At the sound of the name, her expression softened into something almost sacred. "The boy with fire in his hands," she whispered. "He held me like life still mattered." Chuka swallowed hard. "He's resting now. Bring him," she said suddenly. "I want to see him in the Sunday." Minutes later, Tunde stepped into the garden, wearing a clean shirt that still smelled faintly of laundry soap. His skin looked healthier, though. He moved with caution, unsure of where he fit in this gleaming world. "Good morning, Mama," he said gently. Mama Ifeoma smiled, motioning him closer. "Sit, my child." He hesitated, glancing at Chuka. The billionaire nodded slightly, and Tunde took a seat beside her. "Do you know," she began, "I prayed that night not to be rescued, but to be remembered. Then God sent you." Tunde looked down, voice barely a whisper. "I just didn't want you to be alone." She reached for his hand, her touch trembling but full of warmth. "That's the greatest miracle of all, to stay when the world says leave." Chuka watched the two of them, something tight in his chest, unraveling slowly. He thought of his father's funeral 10 years ago when he'd promised to take care of his mother. He had kept her safe, yes, but behind gates and hired hands, not with love. That afternoon, Chuka asked Tunde to join him in the study. The room was lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves of books that no one had read in years. On the wall hung photographs of Chuka with presidents, investors, and actors, and in the center, a massive mahogany desk gleamed under the light. Tunde entered quietly, unsure whether to bow or stand at attention. "Sit," Chuka said, motioning to the chair across from him. "You're not in trouble," he added with a faint smile when he saw Tunde's nervous hands. "I just want to understand you." Tunde nodded. "You said your mother taught you about kindness," Chuka continued. "Tell me about her." Tunde's face softened with memory. "Her name was Ngozi. She was a teacher in Kumasi before we moved here. After my father died, she cleaned offices at night so I could finish school. She used to tell me stories when the power went out, stories of kings who ruled not with wealth but with mercy. She said mercy was the currency of heaven." He paused, his eyes glistening. "When she got sick, we couldn't afford the hospital. She died at home. All I had left was her blanket and her words." Chuka leaned back silent. The boy's voice carried the kind of pain that couldn't be faked. "What do you want now?" Tunde blinked, surprised. "Now, yes? You can't stay lost forever. You have to want something." The boy thought for a long time. "I want to help people like her, people like me, but I don't know how." Chuka nodded slowly. "Maybe that's something we can fix together." Tunde looked up, uncertain whether he'd heard correctly. "I've spent years building companies that make money," Chuka continued. "Maybe it's time I build something that makes meaning." That night, rain returned, not angry this time, just soft cleansing. From his window, Tunde watched droplets slide down the glass while the hum of the city filled the distance. He took out his harmonica, the one he had played at dinner. The melody drifted through the quiet halls, finding its way into every corner of the mansion. Amara, the little girl, peeked out from her room and tiptoed toward the sound. "Can you teach me?" she asked shyly. Tunde smiled. "You'd have to promise to practice." "I promise." She climbed onto the chair beside him, her small hands mimicking his. When she tried to blow a note, it squeaked so badly, they both laughed. The laughter echoed down the hallway, a sound that startled the house staff and made Mama Ifioma smile in her sleep. Upstairs, Chuka stood by the railing, listening. The melody, broken and childlike, stirred something inside him, a feeling he hadn't allowed in years. It wasn't just gratitude, it was longing. For the first time, he saw what his house had been missing all along: sound, laughter, life. The next day, Chuka gathered the staff in the foyer. The polished marble reflected their uneasy faces. "I know some of you wonder why this young man is here," he began. "Let me be clear, he is a guest of this family, not charity. He saved my mother's life and he has a place here as long as he needs it." Some nodded. Others whispered. The security chief muttered something about background checks, but Chuka cut him off. "He's staying." End of discussion. From the staircase, Tunde watched, humbled but uneasy. The words "as long as he needs it" echoed in his mind. He'd never needed anyone's permission to exist before, because no one had ever offered it. That night, he found himself in the kitchen washing dishes beside Patience, the housekeeper. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I like to feel useful," Tunde replied. She studied him for a moment, then smiled. "You already are, child. This house feels different since you came." He chuckled softly. "Maybe it just needed music. Maybe it needed heart," she said. Later, Chuka found his mother sitting by the window, staring out at the boy in the garden, teaching Amara to play the harmonica. "He reminds me of your father," she said without turning. "Not in face, but in soul." Richard always believed that kindness could rebuild nations. Chuka swallowed hard. "You think I've forgotten that? No, my son," she said gently. "You just stopped believing it could rebuild you." Her words hit him like a quiet sermon. He looked again at Tunde, the boy who had nothing yet, had given everything. And in that moment, the idea began to form, fragile but alive, of a foundation. A place that could give other forgotten souls the same chance this one boy had given his family a chance to feel seen. He didn't know it yet, but that thought would change everything. The storm outside faded into stillness. The mansion lights glowed warm against the darkness. And somewhere between the thunder and the soft hum of the harmonica, two worlds, wealth and want, guilt and grace, began to weave themselves into one story. A story that was only just beginning to breathe. The following week, the Okoro mansion felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. The servants whispered it. Even the dogs seemed calmer. Music drifted from the courtyard at sunset, the soft, wandering tune of Tunde's harmonica, often joined by little Amara's laughter, as she missed notes and clapped anyway. But inside, Chuka's chest warmth battled with shame. Every time he looked at Tunde, gratitude came laced with guilt. How many storms had his mother endured in silence while he was away? How many dinners had she eaten alone at that long golden table? He watched Tunde from the veranda one evening, the young man crouched by the flower bed, helping a gardener replace a wilted hibiscus. His clothes were simple, a donated shirt, rolled sleeves. No shoes yet. There was something dignified about how he moved. Careful, present, deliberate. Chuka's business phone buzzed beside him. London office, the caller ID read. He almost didn't answer. Almost. Mr. Okoro, came the crisp British accent of his executive assistant. "The merger meeting's been moved forward. The board expects you back by Friday." Chuka looked toward the garden again. His mother was there now in her shawl, humming along with the harmonica. Amara danced in the grass, barefoot, free as the wind. "Tell them," Chuka said after a long silence, "the deal can wait." There was a pause on the line. "Sir, I said it can wait." He hung up before she could reply. That night, Chuka found Mama Ifioma sitting by the piano in the living room, her hands tracing the keys like she was trying to remember an old song. Tunde stood beside her, showing her how to match notes to the harmonica's tune. When Chuka entered, she smiled. "You used to play this song when you were little," she said. "You said it made you feel brave." "I did," Chuka chuckled, sitting beside her. "I don't remember." "That's the problem with you rich men," she teased softly. "You remember numbers, not songs." Tunde laughed quietly, but then his expression turned serious. "Mama, may I ask something? Ask my son?" He hesitated. "Why were you outside that night, alone in the storm?" The question froze the air. Chuka's eyes darted to his mother. She looked down at the piano keys, her fingers trembling slightly. "I wanted to find my husband," she said simply. "In my mind, he was still out there waiting for me like he always did when it rained." Chuka swallowed the lump in his throat. "Mama?" She turned to him with fragile grace. "I know, my child. I forget things. I lose days. But that night, I didn't lose myself. I found him. In that boy's kindness." Tunde lowered his head, humbled. For a long time no one spoke, only the sound of rain tapping on the roof. Then Mama Ifeoma whispered, "When your father died, he told me, wealth without warmth is a curse. I think I forgot that. And maybe you did too." The words hit Chuka harder than he wanted to admit. Over the next few days, the rhythm of the household changed. Tunde began helping the staff sweeping, carrying groceries, fixing the security light that flickered near the gate. When the cook fell sick, he helped prepare pepper soup using his mother's recipe so rich and spicy that Mama Ifeoma said it tasted like love boiled in a pot. Chuka started spending more time at home working from his study, while Amara and Tunde played outside. Sometimes he caught himself listening for the harmonica instead of the stock alerts on his laptop, but not everyone in the house approved. One evening, while Tunde was in the kitchen washing dishes, the head guard Kwame walked in. His tone carried that sharp edge of disdain wrapped in politeness. "You've made yourself quite comfortable here," he said, crossing his arms. Tunde didn't look up. "Just trying to be useful," Kwame smirked. "Useful? You're a street boy. The boss may be blind with gratitude but don't think you belong here." Tunde's hands tightened on the dishcloth. "I never said I did," good Kwame said. "Then remember your place." He left the door swinging shut behind him. Tunde exhaled slowly. He had heard those words all his life, "know your place." But somehow they hurt more here, where for the first time he had started to believe he might have one. Later that night, Tunde went outside. The rain had stopped, but the ground still shimmered under the moonlight. He walked to the edge of the property where the old gate stood, the same one where he'd first found Mama Ifeoma. He touched the rusted metal. Memories came flooding back, the cold, the fear, her frail hand clutching his, whispering, "Don't leave me." He didn't hear Chuka approach until the man's voice cut softly through the dark. "You still come here?" Tunde turned startled. "Couldn't sleep." "Me neither," Chuka said, stepping beside him. "Every time I look at this gate, I remember that night. It feels like the place where everything broke and everything began." They stood in silence for a while. Crickets sang in the tall grass. Finally, Chuka said, "You know, I used to believe success meant never owing anyone. But now I owe you not just for saving my mother, but for reminding me that people still matter." Tunde shook his head. "You don't owe me, sir. I owe her. She gave me a reason to stay alive that night." Chuka smiled faintly. "Then maybe we're even." He looked up at the night sky, the clouds parting just enough for a few stars to peek through. "I've been thinking," he said, "about starting something new, something that helps young people who've lost their way. Maybe a home, a school, a foundation in my mother's name." Tunde turned toward him slowly. "A place like this," he murmured, "but for people like me." "Yes," Chuka said. "For people like you." The words hung in the air, small but powerful. The first spark of something neither of them yet understood would change hundreds of lives. A few days later, Chuka invited his lawyer and financial advisor to the house. Papers spread across the dining table, proposals, budgets, legal forms. At the top of each page were the words Ifeoma Foundation. Tunde stood quietly by the wall, uncertain why Chuka wanted him there. "You'll help run it," Chuka said, suddenly looking up. "Me, yes. You'll know what they need better than anyone. We'll start small shelters, food programs, counseling, then education apprenticeships. A place for forgotten youth to find their fire again." Tunde blinked, overwhelmed. "I don't know how to run anything," Chuka smiled. "Neither did I when I started my first company. You'll learn. And you'll lead because this began with you." Mama Ifeoma, sitting nearby, clapped her hands softly. "Two sons building one legacy," she said with pride. For a brief moment, the room glowed with something beyond light, a sense of purpose. That night, as the house settled into silence, Tunde lay awake in his new room. He couldn't sleep. The idea of the foundation lit up his mind like lightning behind closed eyelids. He imagined a house filled with laughter, with warmth, with young people who didn't have to choose between hunger and hope. He thought of his mother's blanket, now folded neatly at the end of his bed. "Be kind, my son." He whispered it aloud, the words like a vow. From the hallway, a soft voice answered, "You already are." He turned. It was Mama Ifeoma leaning on her cane, smiling. "Go to sleep, child," she said. "Tomorrow the work begins." He nodded. "Yes, Mama." As she shuffled away, he lay back down, eyes open, watching the moon trace patterns on the ceiling. He was no longer the boy who slept on pavements or behind shuttered shops. He was part of something now, not just a family, but a purpose. And though the rain had stopped, he could still feel its rhythm somewhere inside him, steady and alive, like a second heartbeat. Because that storm hadn't just changed one night, it had changed him. Morning light poured through the glass walls of the Okoro estate, gilding the marble floors in gold. Birds danced above the fountain outside, and the smell of fresh kenki and coffee drifted from the kitchen. For the first time in years, the mansion felt awake, not because of wealth, but because of people. Tunde walked across the courtyard, barefoot, the dew cool beneath his feet. In his hands was a tray pap for Mama Ifeoma, toast and eggs for Amara, and black tea for Chuka. He still couldn't believe the way his days had changed, no longer wandering the streets, but waking to serve and be needed. "Mama, breakfast," he said softly as he entered her room. Mama Ifeoma sat by the window watching the garden. Her eyes were distant but peaceful. "I used to wake up to the sound of market women calling outside our old home in Kumasi," she said, smiling faintly. "Now it's birds. God truly has a sense of humor." Tunde laughed quietly and set down the tray. "He does, Mama." She turned to look at him. "Do you know, child, I sometimes forget faces now, even my own son's, but never yours. Maybe kindness leaves a mark stronger than memory." He didn't know how to reply, so he bowed his head. She reached for his hand. "Promise me something, Tunde. Anything, Mama. When this foundation begins, don't let it become another palace for rich men to feel holy. Build it for people who have nothing but hope." Tunde's voice caught. "I promise." By noon, the mansion buzzed with preparations. Architects, assistants, and contractors came and went. Chuka stood in the center of the living room with rolled blueprints under his arm, his phone pressed to his ear. "No, Desmond," he said firmly. "We're not building another corporate headquarters. We're building a home. Keep the costs down and the heart up." "Yes, the heart." He hung up, noticing Tunde watching from the doorway. "What's that look for?" "You sound different when you talk about this place," Tunde said. Chuka smiled. "That's because for once I'm building something I actually believe in." He gestured toward the blueprints. "Look, the main house will hold dorm rooms for 20 plus a study hall. There'll be a workshop in the back for carpentry and tailoring and a small music room." "I remembered your harmonica." Tunde's eyes widened. "You remember that?" Chuka chuckled. "Hard to forget when you play it at sunrise every day." The two men stood side by side studying the plans. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was a second chance for both of them. That afternoon they drove together through the outskirts of Accra, scouting for land. The city slowly gave way to red earth and scattered palms. Children chased after their car, laughing, shouting, White Benz, Tunde watched them from the window, a lump forming in his throat. "That was me once," he said quietly, "running after cars that would never stop." Chuka glanced at him. "And now you're inside one." "I still don't feel like I belong here," Tunde admitted. "Sometimes I wait to wake up and find myself back under the bridge near Makola Market." Chuka's voice softened. "Maybe belonging isn't about where you came from. It's about what you build next." They stopped at an open field near the edge of the city, half overgrown, bordered by mango trees and a dried-up stream. The soil was rich, the air clean. "This," Chuka said, stepping out of the car, "feels right." Tunde knelt, digging his fingers into the red dirt. "It feels alive." Chuka smiled. Then it settled. This will be the Ifeoma Foundation, a home for hope. As they stood there, wind brushing their faces, the weight of what they were creating began to sink in. Days turned into weeks. The mansion became a hive of planning. Mama Ifeoma oversaw everything with gentle authority, though her memory flickered like an old candle. Sometimes she'd forget Tunde's name mid-sentence, only to recall it moments later with joy. "Ah, my son of kindness," she'd say, and everyone would smile. Amara drew crayon sketches of the new home, colorful houses filled with laughing children, and pinned them all over the walls. Chuka began taking fewer business calls and more community meetings. He started visiting local youth centers, talking to pastors, social workers, and teachers. He learned the names of the streets where children slept, the alleys where girls disappeared, the corners where hunger waited. And always beside him was Tunde, asking questions, taking notes, seeing his city through new eyes. "You're good at this," Chuka told him one evening as they walked back from a shelter. Tunde shrugged. "I just listen. That's exactly what makes you good." One night, a storm rolled over Accra, heavy drumming, insistent. The kind that made the world smell like rain and electricity. Tunde couldn't sleep. The thunder brought back memories of that first night, Mama shivering his arms around her, the desperate need to keep her alive. He got up, stepped outside into the courtyard, and tilted his face to the sky. Rain soaked him instantly, but he didn't move. Inside, a light flicked on. Chuka appeared under the archway, holding 2 mugs of steaming tea. "Do you ever get tired of storms?" he asked, walking over. "Never," Tunde said. "They remind me that even heaven cries." Chuka handed him a mug. "You talk like a poet." "My mother used to write little poems on scraps of paper," Tunde said, smiling faintly. "She said words can feed the soul when food runs out." Chuka sipped his tea in silence. Then he said, when this foundation opens, I want you to be more than a worker, Tunde. I want you to lead it with me. Tunde blinked, stunned. Lead, I'm not qualified. You're more qualified than any of my executives. You've lived the story we're trying to change. I don't even have a degree. Then we'll get you one, Chuka said simply. I'll sponsor your studies. You'll finish school and come back to build this properly. Tunde's breath caught. He'd never dared to imagine university, let alone a future that stretched that far. Why me, he whispered. Because Chuka said, looking him in the eye, you stayed when the world walked away. You didn't save my mother for reward, and that's exactly the kind of heart this world needs leading. Tunde's throat tightened. I don't know what to say. Say you'll try. He nodded. I'll try. The rain softened, turning into a mist that glittered under the garden lights. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled like applause. The next morning, Chuka called a family meeting at breakfast. Mama Ifeoma sat in her wheelchair, Amara beside her, swinging her legs. The staff gathered quietly at the edge of the dining hall. Chuka stood holding a document. I have an announcement, he said. The Ifeoma Foundation will break ground in 3 weeks, and Tunde, he paused, smiling, will serve as its first director in training. The room murmured. Amara gasped and clapped. Mama Ifeoma beamed, but Tunde just sat frozen. He wanted to refuse to say it was too much, but when he met Mama's eyes, he saw only pride and peace. Come here, my son, she said. He walked over, kneeling beside her chair. She cupped his face in her thin hands. Do you see now, God never wastes storms. He only waits for hearts willing to listen. Tunde pressed his forehead to her hands. Thank you, Mama. Chuka placed a hand on his shoulder. And thank you, brother. Brother. The word landed like sunlight. Not a guest, not a stranger, a brother. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Tunde sat by the window staring out at the dark horizon, where the city lights shimmered faintly. His harmonica rested on his lap. He thought about how far he'd come from sleeping under a torn billboard to planning homes for others, from being invisible to being trusted, from being alone to belonging. He raised the harmonica to his lips and began to play slow, soulful notes that drifted through the quiet house. In her room down the hall, Mama Ifeoma stirred and smiled in her sleep. Chuka, half awake, listened from his study, the sound filling his heart with something he hadn't felt since childhood peace. And outside, the first light of dawn crept over Accra, washing the city in gold. The storm had ended. But its echo, the one that began at a broken gate in the arms of a poor boy and a lost woman, was just beginning to shape the future. Because sometimes a single act of kindness doesn't end a story. It starts a new one. 2 months later, the once empty field at the edge of Accra had become a place of rebirth. Bulldozers carved roads through the red earth, the scent of rain mixing with dust. Steel beams rose like the skeletons of future dreams. A signboard at the gate read in bold letters, Ifeoma Foundation, a home for hope. On the day the first wall went up, Tunde stood beside Chuka, hard hat slightly too big for his head, clipboard clutched in his hands. The workers greeted him with respect, calling him Boss Jr. He wasn't used to it, and every time they said it, he smiled awkwardly, but inside a small flame of pride began to glow. Remember, Chuka said, pointing toward the construction layout, we start with the dormitory and the classroom blocks. Keep it simple, keep it solid. No glass towers, no ego projects. Tunde nodded. It's not supposed to impress rich people. It's supposed to shelter poor ones. Exactly, Chuka said. They watched in silence as cement was poured and hammers struck in rhythm. The sound felt like a heartbeat, steady, determined. When the first foundation stone was laid, Mama Ifeoma was brought in her wheelchair to bless the site. Her voice trembled as she prayed, may this ground remember every tear that built it, and may no one who enters here feel invisible again. The workers echoed, amen, their voices rolling through the afternoon heat like thunder. In the weeks that followed, Tunde's days blurred into motion. He coordinated supply trucks, argued politely with contractors, and made sure the construction crew had enough water and meals. His once slim frame grew sturdier, his confidence steadier. At night, he'd sit on the unfinished steps of the dormitory and write in a small notebook sketches of ideas for youth programs, notes on job training, and fragments of his mother's sayings. Kindness is the seed, not the harvest. Forgive faster than you fail. He wrote not to dream, but to remember. One evening, while checking material invoices, Tunde noticed a strange pattern, repeated amounts, inflated costs on steel delivery. The signature line carried a name, Kwame Owusu, the estate's security chief. Tunde frowned. He didn't want to believe it, but the math didn't lie. Someone was siphoning money. He brought the file to Chuka's office, hesitant. The billionaire sat behind his desk reading through company reports, his tie loosened. Sir Tunde said quietly, placing the documents down. I think there's a problem. Chuka looked up. Problem, Tunde explained what he found. As he spoke, Chuka's expression darkened, not in anger at Tunde, but at the betrayal in his own house. Kwame's been with us for 8 years, Chuka said bitterly. I trusted him with everything. Tunde hesitated. Sometimes trust blinds us to small shadows, sir. Chuka exhaled. You're right. Leave it with me. I'll handle it. But that night, Tunde couldn't shake the unease. Something about the numbers, the deliveries didn't feel like a small theft. It felt organized. 2 days later, trouble arrived. A construction truck, supposedly carrying building sand, overturned at the site. When the police came, they found not sand but bags of cement stamped with another company's logo smuggled through forged receipts. Chuka's business reputation began to ripple through the media. Headlines read Philanthropy or Fraud Okoro's Foundation under fire. The reporters camped outside his mansion. Sponsors hesitated. The same people who had toasted his generosity at cocktail parties now whispered in corners. That night, Chuka slammed the newspaper down in fury. They think I'm using charity to launder money. My mother's name dragged through mud. Tunde stood beside him. Then we clean it with truth, Hal Chuka demanded. They've already decided I'm guilty. Then let them see who you really are. Let them meet the people we're building for. Chuka blinked the rage in his face, giving way to something steadier purpose. A public open day, he said slowly. Before it's even finished. Yes, Tunde said. Let them walk through the rooms, meet the workers, hear Mama Ifeoma's blessing. Let the story tell itself. Chuka nodded. You'll organize it. Me, you're the heart of this place. I'll handle the board. You handle the people. The following week, under the blazing Ghanaian sun, the open day began. Dozens of visitors streamed in, journalists, church leaders, local families, even skeptical donors. The half-built dormitories stood like monuments of faith amid red earth and wind. Tunde guided the guests through the site, showing them each room, each beam, explaining how local youth were being trained as apprentices during construction. This foundation isn't about pity, he said to a group of journalists. It's about possibility. He pointed toward a group of young workers mixing cement. Half of them were sleeping on the streets 3 months ago. Now they're building futures their own. The crowd murmured in approval. Cameras clicked. When Mama Ifeoma was wheeled onto the platform for her speech, the entire site fell silent. Her voice trembled, but her eyes blazed with clarity. This home began in the rain, she said. One night, a poor boy chose to stay beside an old woman. Now that boy builds houses for those who have no roofs, and I am proud to call him my son. Applause thundered across the site. Even the journalists who came for scandal stood clapping, their eyes moist. Chuka stepped forward, taking the microphone. My mother is right. I built empires that meant nothing. This, he gestured to the walls rising behind him. This is the only legacy I want. When the event ended, the news coverage flipped overnight. New headlines appeared, from storm to sanctuary. Okoro family turns pain into purpose. That night back at the mansion, Chuka poured Tunde a glass of malt drink. You saved us again, he said. Tunde smiled. You saved yourself, sir. I just held the torch. Chuka laughed. Then keep holding it, because tomorrow we break ground on the training center. But fate wasn't done testing them. The next morning, a call came from the hospital. Chuka dropped his coffee mid-sip. Mama Ifeoma's collapsed, the nurse said. Within minutes, they were racing through Accra's traffic. Sirens wailed as the car sped through intersections. Tunde prayed silently the entire way. At Korlebu Hospital, the doctors worked behind the curtain. Chuka paced, his hands shaking. When the doctor finally stepped out, his face was grave. She's stable for now, he said. But her heart is very weak. The stress of the last few days. Chuka sank into a chair, head in his hands. She can't die, he whispered. Not now. Tunde sat beside him. She won't. She's stronger than both of us combined. That night, they sat by her bedside. Tubes ran from her arms, the monitor beeping softly. She opened her eyes, saw them both, and smiled faintly. My boys, she whispered, always chasing storms. Rest, Mama, Chuka said, taking her hand. We'll fix everything. You already have, she said weakly. You've built light where there was darkness. But remember, light has a price. You must keep it burning. Her words faded into a soft hum as she drifted back to sleep. Tunde sat there watching her chest rise and fall, his heart heavy with gratitude and fear. When dawn came, he whispered a promise to the morning sky. I'll keep it burning, Mama. I swear it. Outside, the first call to prayer echoed through Accra, a quiet reminder that mercy never sleeps. The storm that had once brought them together was stirring again, but this time they were ready to stand in the rain. The hospital's corridors smelled of bleach and sorrow. Nurses moved quietly, their white shoes whispering against the floor. The air conditioning hummed like a distant memory of rain. Inside room 214, Mama Ifeoma slept beneath thin white sheets, her skin pale against the soft blue light of the monitors. Chuka Okoro sat at her bedside, elbows on his knees, eyes bloodshot from exhaustion. Every hour felt like a year. His mother's breath came slow, each one a fragile thread tying her to the world. Across from him, Tunde stood silently watching. His shirt was rumpled, his face drawn from sleepless nights, but his gaze was steady. He had seen illness before, seen death too, yet something about this room terrified him. It wasn't the machines or the smell of disinfectant. It was the thought of losing the woman who had given his life meaning twice over, first through rescue, then through purpose. A soft knock came at the door. It was Amara holding a crayon, drawing in her small hands a picture of Mama Ifeoma smiling under a golden sundae. "Daddy," she whispered, "is Grandma going to wake up?" Chuka swallowed hard before answering. "We hope so, my love." She placed the drawing gently on the table beside the bed. Maybe if she sees this, she'll remember to come back. Tunde's throat tightened. He reached down and squeezed the girl's hand. "That's a beautiful gift, Amara. She'll love it." The child smiled weakly, then leaned in to kiss her grandmother's cheek. "Don't forget us, okay?" When she left, the silence returned heavier than before. Days passed in a blur of prayers, hospital meals, and whispered updates. Outside, the foundation's construction continued, though slower, without its guiding light. Chuka visited the site daily between hospital shifts, his clothes still smelling faintly of antiseptic. Tunde managed the workers in his absence, often returning to the hospital after dusk with photos of progress to show Mama Ifeoma, even though she hadn't opened her eyes in 3 days. One evening, Chuka came back from the site, dust still clinging to his trousers. He placed a stack of reports on the table and sighed. "Everything's on schedule, but the new donors are hesitating again. They think this illness is bad luck. Let them go," Tunde said firmly. "We'll build without them if we have to." Chuka looked up. "You sound like her." Tunde smiled faintly. "Maybe I've been listening too closely." They both fell silent eyes on the sleeping woman who had stitched their lives together. That night, Tunde stayed behind while Chuka took Amara home for a few hours of rest. He sat by Mama's bed, the faint beeping of the monitor, his only companion. Her hand lay limp on the blanket, the veins thin as paper. He reached for his harmonica, the one she'd asked him to play the night of her recovery months ago. Holding it gently, he whispered, "One more song for you, Mama." The tune began soft and fragile, weaving through the sterile air like smoke. It wasn't Amazing Grace this time. It was a song his own mother used to hum when she cooked on quiet evenings, a song about patience, about finding God and waiting. As the notes trembled from his lips, something shifted. Mama's fingers twitched. Her eyelids fluttered. Tunde froze mid-note. "Mama," he whispered, leaning forward. Her lips parted, dry and cracked. You still play," she murmured. Tears filled his eyes instantly. "Always, Mama." "I never stopped." She smiled faintly, her gaze unfocused but full of warmth. "The music found me," she whispered. "I was lost and it called me home." He laughed through his tears. "Then don't go wandering again, you hear?" Her eyes drifted to the window. "Promise me something, Tunde. Anything. When I'm gone, don't let him forget who he is. My son, he carries too much pride and too much pain. You must remind him that love, not success, is his inheritance." Tunde's voice shook. "Don't say when." "Mama, you'll be here to see the first house open." But she only smiled, that quiet, knowing smile of someone who's seen too much of both heaven and earth. "Every foundation must have a cornerstone," she whispered. "Mine is already laid." Her hand slipped from his. The monitor began to beep faster, then slower. Nurses rushed in. Someone shouted for the doctor. Tunde stepped back, the harmonica falling from his fingers, his chest tightening as the world collapsed into white noise. Within minutes, the line on the screen went flat. The funeral was held a week later beneath the wide mango trees behind the foundation site. The city's rich came in black suits and sunglasses. The poor came barefoot, clutching wilted flowers. Chuka stood before the crowd, face pale, voice breaking as he spoke. "She taught me that kindness is the only currency that never loses value. I lost my mother twice in this life, once to sickness and once to my own distance. But she returned, not through miracles but through mercy, through a boy who showed her the heart of God. He turned to Tunde. Their eyes met, one full of grief, the other of reverence. She called him her second son. I do the same. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the mourners. Some smiled, some wept. When it was Tunde's turn to speak, his voice was barely above the wind. She once told me that no one truly dies if their kindness keeps working in the world. So I won't say goodbye, Mama. I'll say see you in every meal we serve, in every child who sleeps under our roof, in every song that keeps someone from giving up. He lifted the harmonica and played. The sound floated over the crowd, gentle and sure. Even the birds seemed to pause. After the burial, Chuka disappeared for 2 days. No one knew where he went. The mansion felt hollow again, the corridors echoing like before. On the third night, as rain began to fall softly, Tunde found him in the garden, drenched, sitting on the same bench where Mama used to drink her tea. She's gone, Chuka said, his voice breaking. And I don't know how to live without her. Tunde knelt beside him. You live for her now. That's the difference. Chuka stared at him, eyes filled with anguish. You don't understand. I built my whole world around making her proud. Now there's no one left to see it. There is, Tunde said quietly. Look around, sir. The people building the foundation, the children waiting for a home, they're all her eyes now. Chuka's breath trembled. You sound like her again. Then listen like she would. For a moment, neither spoke. Rain pooled at their feet, the garden lights shimmering through the drops. Finally, Chuka whispered, She told me once that you reminded her of my father. Tunde smiled faintly. She told me you reminded her of God, stubborn, loving, and sometimes too slow to forgive. That made Chuka laugh through his tears. She really said that. She did, Tunde said, and I think she was right. When dawn came, they stood together in the quiet garden, rain-soaked but calm. The air smelled of wet hibiscus and red soil. Chuka turned to Tunde. We finished the foundation not in her memory, but in her presence. She'll live there in every brick, Tunde nodded, and in every heart that walks through the door. Will you stay by my side? Chuka asked. Tunde looked at him, the answer already written in his eyes. Always. A week later, construction resumed. The workers nailed the final beams of the dormitory. The first classroom took shape. The walls gleamed white against the crimson earth, like hope carved into stone. On the central wall of the main building, Chuka ordered a plaque to be placed. It read, In loving memory of Mama Ifeoma Okoro, whose kindness built more than homes, it built people. And beneath it, in smaller letters, another line chosen by Tunde Home is where someone stays for you. When they unveiled it, the workers applauded, tears glinting in their eyes. The two men, the billionaire and the boy, stood side by side under the rising Sunday. Between them, a shadow once made of guilt had turned into something unbreakable. And though grief still whispered through the corridors of their hearts, one truth stood taller than all their pain. The light Mama Ifeoma left behind had found new keepers, and they would never let it go out. 6 months later, the Ifeoma Foundation stood complete, a warm stretch of whitewashed buildings rising from the red earth on the outskirts of Accra. From afar, it looked almost like a small village-wide courtyards framed by mango trees, low dormitory roofs painted coral, a bright mural of Mama Ifeoma smiling down on the main gate with the words, Love is shelter made visible. The grand opening was set for a Saturday morning. Banners fluttered under the harmattan wind. Musicians tuned their drums, and the scent of jollof rice drifted from the kitchen staff's tents. Reporters gathered near the stage, waiting for the country's most unpredictable billionaire and his mysterious protege to speak. But inside one of the small offices, Tunde stood frozen before a mirror. He wore a neatly pressed white shirt, borrowed suit trousers, and a pair of black shoes Chuka had insisted on buying him. He looked older than his 19 years, not because of age, but because of everything the streets had carved into him. His reflection stared back with equal parts pride and disbelief. How did I end up here? Stop doubting yourself, came Amara's voice behind him. The 10-year-old leaned against the doorway, grinning. You look like a politician who actually tells the truth. Tunde laughed. That's the rarest kind. Grandma would be proud, she said softly. He turned, and for a moment her face, bright and open, made his chest ache. She's here, he said, pressing a hand to his heart. Always. Outside, a wave of applause erupted as Chuka stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand. The sun blazed high, reflecting off the newly built roofs. Today he began, we open more than walls. We open doors for those who've slept in the cold, for those who were told they didn't belong. My mother dreamed of a place where love was not a sermon, but a structure. This, he gestured to the compound behind him, is her dream made solid. He paused, scanning the crowd. His eyes found Tunde standing at the edge, nervous but steady. And none of this, he continued, would exist without the boy who saved her, who reminded me what wealth really means. Please welcome the Director of Youth Programs, my brother Tunde Owusu. The crowd erupted, cameras flashed. Tunde hesitated, then walked to the microphone. His palms sweated, his heart thundered, but when he looked at the faces before him, the workers, the volunteers, the children from the nearby shelters, his fear dissolved. I didn't grow up believing in miracles, he began. But I've learned that sometimes miracles wear calloused hands and borrowed shoes. I used to think survival was enough, that kindness was a luxury poor people couldn't afford. Then one night I found an old woman lost in the rain, and she showed me that compassion is not weakness, it's wealth of the soul. The wind carried his words, lifting them over the crowd. This place, Tunde said, voice steadying, belongs to every person who was ever ignored, overlooked, or forgotten. Here you will not be invisible. You will be seen, you will be heard, and you will be loved. The audience rose in applause. Even the journalists stopped typing for a moment to clap. From the front row, Chuka wiped a tear discreetly. The following weeks brought life to the foundation in ways none of them had predicted. The first group of youths arrived, 22 boys and girls, ages 16 to 23, all homeless or recently released from juvenile centers. Tunde personally welcomed each one. He learned their names, their fears, their dreams. Kojo, who wanted to be a mechanic. Efwa, who sang like sunlight. Blessing, who didn't talk for days until she saw the mural and whispered, "She looks like my grandma." Each morning began with breakfast in the open courtyard, laughter mixing with the clatter of dishes. Afternoons buzzed with activity, literacy lessons, carpentry classes, tailoring workshops, and group therapy sessions led by local counselors. Tunde worked tirelessly, barely sleeping, but he felt more alive than he ever had. One evening, as the sun melted into orange and purple, he sat with Chuka outside the administrative building. "You've turned chaos into community," Chuka said. "Do you realize that?" Tunde smiled faintly. "I just did what she asked," kept the light burning. Chuka looked around at the dormitories, glowing with laughter, at the smell of stew drifting from the kitchen, at the sound of drums somewhere in the distance. "It's brighter than I ever imagined." Then his tone shifted. "But brightness attracts attention, and not always the good kind." Tunde frowned. "What do you mean there's talk in certain circles?" Chuka said. "Politicians want a piece of this. They see votes and headlines, not lives. They're offering funding, but they'll want control." Tunde's jaw tightened. "We can't let them turn kindness into a campaign." "I agree," Chuka said, "but we need resources to grow. Expansion means compromise or courage." Tunde looked at him, fire in his eyes. "Then we choose courage." Chuka smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." 1 month later, an unexpected visitor arrived at the foundation gates. A woman in her late 50s, dressed simply, but with authority. She introduced herself as Minister Abina Ofori, a government official overseeing social programs. "I've heard impressive things about this place," she said, walking through the courtyard. "But impressive can also mean inconvenient." Tunde met her gaze. "We're not here to impress anyone, ma'am, just to help." Abena smiled tightly. "Help requires money, and money requires permission. The state could make your work easier, or bury it in paperwork," Tunde said calmly. She chuckled. "You speak boldly for someone so young. But remember, good deeds can't live without good politics," maybe, Tunde replied. But this home was born in a storm, not an office. Their eyes locked. For a long moment, the wind carried silence between them. Then she turned away. "You'll learn soon enough that the world doesn't run on faith alone." When she left, Chuka stepped out from behind the gate. "You just told off a cabinet minister," he said with a grin. Tunde sighed. "Did I make things worse?" Probably, Chuka said. "But Mama would have loved it." They both laughed, the kind of laugh that breaks tension, that reminds two men they're still standing on the same side of a fight worth having. Weeks turned into months. The foundation became a living miracle. News outlets across Ghana began calling it the house that kindness built. Donations poured in, not from corporations, but from ordinary people, taxi drivers, teachers, market women who sent envelopes of 5 cedis each. Every Sunday evening, Tunde gathered everyone in the courtyard for a ritual they called Circle of Thanks. They'd light candles, tell stories of the week, and share what they were grateful for. One night during the circle, Blessing stood up. "Before coming here, I thought I'd die without anyone knowing my name," she said, her voice trembling. "Now every morning people say good morning to me like I matter. That's all I ever wanted." Tunde swallowed hard. Around him, others nodded, tears catching the candlelight. When it was his turn, he said, "I'm grateful for storms because they remind us we can build shelters." Late one night, as the compound slept, Tunde walked to the gate and stood before Mama Ifeoma's mural. The moonlight made her painted eyes shimmer as though alive. He whispered, "We did it, Mama. You were right. Kindness never dies, it multiplies." From behind him, Chuka's voice answered quietly. She'd be proud of her sons. Tunde turned. Chuka was holding a folder, documents freshly signed. "What's this?" Chuka handed it to him. "Official papers. The foundation is now in your name as co-director. You're not my assistant anymore, Tunde. You're my partner." Tunde's eyes widened. "I can't accept this. You already earned it," Chuka interrupted. "I was born into wealth. You were born into struggle. But you built something money never could, faith. And that's the real foundation." Tunde felt his throat close. "I don't know what to say." Chuka smiled. "Say you'll keep building." "I will," Tunde whispered. They stood together under the moonlight, two men bound by one woman's legacy, by one night of mercy that had rewritten both their lives. In the distance, the drums of Accra echoed faintly through the hills, a reminder that even in a noisy world, some hearts still beat for something pure. And as the night deepened, the mural's painted smile seemed to glow just a little brighter, as if the woman who had started it all was watching, still whispering her blessing into the wind. "Keep the light burning, my sons. The world still needs to see." The Ifeoma Foundation entered its second year, like a rising dawn full of warmth, promise, and applause. Local newspapers called it a miracle built from rain. Donors from across West Africa visited the campus marveling at its transformation. Clean dormitories, bustling workshops, gardens where children once hungry now grew cassava and laughter. But with success came attention, and attention brought its oldest companion, envy. One humid morning in May, Tunde Owusu arrived at the office early. The compound still slept, bathed in gray dawn. He liked those hours best, quiet enough to hear the birds, honest enough to think. But that morning a figure was already waiting inside Kwame, the former security chief who'd been dismissed months earlier for corruption. Tunde froze in the doorway. "What are you doing here?" Kwame smiled thinly. "Relax, director. I'm not here to cause trouble." "You were banned from this property," True Kwame said, brushing dust from his sleeves. "But I came to warn you. People in town are talking, saying the foundation is hiding money, that your boss is planning a political move." Tunde frowned. "That's nonsense." "Maybe," Kwame said, stepping closer, "but in Ghana nonsense becomes truth if enough people repeat it. And I hear some powerful men want to make sure the story sticks." Tunde studied him, suspicion darkening his tone. "Why tell me this?" "Because," Kwame said softly, "you're not like them. You actually care, but caring won't save you when they come." Before Tunde could ask who they were, Kwame tipped his cap and slipped out, disappearing into the morning mist. The words lingered like smoke when they come. By noon, the first tremor hit. An anonymous report appeared on social media accusing the Ifeoma Foundation of foreign fund mismanagement and unauthorized youth recruitment. Within hours, several news outlets picked it up. Photos of Chuka, smiling beside Tunde at the last event, were posted with headlines that twisted their mission into scandal. When Tunde saw it, his stomach dropped. "This is a lie," he said, pacing the office. "I know," Chuka Okoro replied, voice tight. He looked older than usual, shadows under his eyes. "But lies move faster than truth. I've been through this before. They'll drag us through the mud to see who breaks first." Tunde slammed his fist against the desk. "Then we fight back." Chuka shook his head. "Not yet. Fighting shadows makes you look guilty. We wait. We let our work speak." Tunde hated waiting. He hated silence when people who'd never seen the foundation spread poison about it. But he trusted Chuka until the letter arrived. 3 days later, a government seal appeared on their gate, an audit notice. The Ministry of Social Welfare demanded access to all financial records, donations, and staff contracts. When the inspectors arrived, they treated the foundation like a crime scene. Files were opened, computers checked, even dormitories searched. The children whispered in fear. Tunde followed one officer through the hall, anger barely restrained. "We have nothing to hide," he said. The officer sneered. "Then you have nothing to fear." By evening, the story had made national news. Okoro Foundation under investigation for misuse of public donations. Chuka sat alone in his office, phone buzzing nonstop. "I knew this would happen," he muttered. "They can't stand a rich man doing good without permission." Tunde stepped closer. "We can go public. Show the real numbers. Tell the story of the kids." "No," Chuka said sharply. "Not yet. We wait for the report. Patience wins wars." But when the government's interim statement leaked 2 days later, Patience died. The report claimed irregular financial practices and recommended temporary suspension of operations. In the courtyard, the staff gathered, eyes wide with panic. Volunteers cried. Children clutched their belongings. Tunde climbed onto the steps of the main hall. "Listen to me," he shouted over the noise. "This place isn't closing. Do you hear me? Not while we still breathe." His voice cracked, but his conviction didn't. The crowd fell silent. "We built this with honesty and blood. We don't steal, we serve. And if they want to take it from us, they'll have to walk through every one of us to do it." The cheer that followed was small but fierce. Even Chuka, standing behind him, felt something stir the memory of courage he'd once lost. That night, the foundation was quiet again. The government trucks had left taking boxes of paperwork. The lights in the main building burned late as Chuka and Tunde pored over old files. At one point, Tunde looked up, exhaustion heavy in his eyes. "Do you think they'll shut us down?" Chuka didn't answer at first. He reached into his drawer, pulled out a worn envelope, and handed it to Tunde. Inside was a letter written in Mama Ifeoma's careful script. "For my sons when storms return." Tunde read aloud. "When the rain falls again, remember that truth needs time to shine. Don't chase lightning. Build a roof for those still under the rain. The world may doubt what it doesn't understand, but faith is a patient builder." He set the letter down slowly. "She knew," he whispered. Chuka nodded. She always knew. For a long time, neither spoke. The hum of the generator filled the silence like a heartbeat. Finally, Chuka said, "If they take this place, we'll start again. Somewhere else. Smaller. But we won't stop." Tunde nodded. "We'll never stop." The next week felt endless. Donations froze. Volunteers withdrew out of fear. Even some of the older children whispered about leaving. Then one evening, while the compound prepared for lights out, a young journalist named Miriam Boateng arrived. "I've seen the reports," she said, "but something doesn't add up. The numbers they accuse you of mishandling, I traced them. They lead to a ghost company registered under the same name as your former contractor." Kwame Tunde said instantly. Miriam nodded. "Yes, the same man dismissed last year." Chuka's eyes flashed with recognition. "He's been working with the minister's people." Miriam handed them a flash drive. "Everything's here, receipts, signatures, proof of who really diverted the funds. Publish it carefully. The truth is your strongest weapon." Tunde stared at her. "Why are you helping us?" She smiled. "Because I grew up like your students. And I remember what it felt like when people only told half the story." The next day they called a press conference on the foundation grounds. The crowd that gathered was tense, half expecting confession, half expecting collapse. Chuka took the stage first. "They said we were thieves," he began, "but thieves hide in darkness. We built this place in light." Then he gestured to Tunde. "My brother will show you what they didn't want you to see." Tunde connected the projector and displayed the files Miriam had uncovered. The evidence was clear: fake invoices tied to Kwame's alias bank records, linking him to government accounts. Gasps rippled through the audience. When he finished, Tunde said quietly, "The people who tried to destroy us forgot something: kindness keeps receipts, and truth always finds its way home." The reporters erupted. Cameras flashed. Within hours, the story spread. Ifeoma Foundation, vindicated, corruption ring exposed. The same minister who once threatened them now faced an inquiry. Kwame was arrested 2 days later, trying to flee the country. That evening, as twilight settled over the compound, Tunde and Chuka sat beneath Mama Ifeoma's mural. The sky glowed amber, the air humming with cicadas. "She did it again," Tunde said. "Even from beyond, she saved us." Chuka smiled faintly. "No, you did. You carried her faith when mine ran out." Tunde shook his head. "We both carried her, just on different shoulders." They fell silent, watching the children in the courtyard play a game of tag, their laughter echoing against the walls that had almost been lost. After a while, Chuka said, "You know, every great thing faces a shadow. Maybe that's how we prove it's real." Tunde looked up at the fading light. "Then let the shadows come. We'll just keep building fires." Later that night, Tunde stood alone before the mural, tracing the words etched below. "Home is where someone stays for you." He whispered, "We're still staying, Mama. We're still here." And somewhere in the stillness carried by the night wind came the faintest whisper, or maybe just memory, saying, "Back? Then my work is done." The moon rose above the foundation, casting silver light on the roofs below, light that no scandal, no envy, no storm could ever erase again. Because the house built by kindness had already weathered its darkest rain. A full year passed after the storm of scandals and trials. The Ifeoma Foundation not only survived, it thrived. Its name became a symbol whispered with respect across Ghana, Nigeria, and Sierra Leone. Journalists who once hunted for dirt now came searching for inspiration. Universities invited Tunde Owusu to speak about leadership and redemption. Newspapers wrote of Chuka Okoro as the billionaire who learned to kneel. But neither man saw themselves as heroes. They knew the price that had been paid in tears, sleepless nights, and the silent strength of a woman whose voice still guided them from memory. On a warm Sunday morning, the foundation courtyard was filled with life. Children played football barefoot, dust rising beneath their laughter. A group of girls practiced sewing in the shade of the mango trees. On the far side, a choir rehearsed their voices, carrying joy into the blue across sky. Tunde stood near the garden, watering a bed of hibiscus. A few petals brushed his wrist, soft, crimson, familiar. Mama Ifeoma had loved these flowers. She said they reminded her of resilience. Cut them, and they bloom again. He looked up to see Chuka approaching, dressed in a simple white kaftan, holding 2 mugs of steaming tea. "Morning, my brother," Chuka greeted. "Morning, sir, Chuka," Tunde corrected, smiling. "Still can't stop calling me sir, can you?" "Old habits die hard." Chuka handed him a mug. "So do good ones." They stood side by side, watching the courtyard bustle. After a moment, Chuka said quietly, "I got a call from the ministry this morning." Tunde's eyebrows rose. "More inspections? No. Invitations." He passed his phone to Tunde, who scanned the email. "The government of Ghana requests the partnership of the Ifeoma Foundation in a national youth empowerment initiative." Tunde whistled low. "That's big." Chuka nodded. "They're offering funding and freedom to operate across regions. It's what we dreamed of." "But what's the catch?" "None this time," Chuka said. "The minister who caused us trouble last year was forced to resign. The new one, she used to volunteer here as a student." Tunde smiled. "God really writes the long stories, doesn't he? Always with plot twists," Chuka replied with a chuckle. They fell silent again, listening to the choir's soft harmonies. At noon, they gathered everyone in the hall. The air was thick with excitement. Students, staff, and volunteers filled every seat. The foundation's blue and white banner hung proudly behind the podium. Chuka stepped up first. "My family," he began, voice firm but warm, "our work is expanding. The government has invited us to build satellite centers in 3 new cities, Kumasi, Takoradi, and Tamale. This means more lives, more chances, and more responsibility." Applause rippled through the room. He gestured toward Tunde. "And this man, my brother, your teacher, will lead the new central campus. The board has decided he'll officially serve as executive director." The room erupted in cheers. Amara jumped from her chair, clapping wildly. Even the older staff whistled. Tunde stood frozen, his mouth open. "Executive," what Chuka grinned. "You heard me." When the noise died down, Tunde approached the microphone. His voice trembled at first. "I don't deserve this." "Yes, you do," Amara shouted. He laughed softly, then grew serious. "When I came here, I didn't know where I belonged. I just wanted to stay alive long enough to see one more sunrise. But now I know belonging isn't found, it's built. Brick by brick, act by act, moment by moment, and all of you helped me build mine." He paused, looking around at the faces, workers, students, children, strangers who had become home. "So if I stand here today," he said, "it's not as a director but as proof. Proof that mercy works, that love works, that Mama Ifeoma was right, kindness doesn't retire." The hall exploded in applause, again louder, this time with laughter and tears mixed in. Outside, a gust of wind swept through the open windows, rustling the curtains. Some swore later they could hear a faint, familiar voice in that wind, soft like a mother's prayer. That evening, Tunde and Chuka sat on the steps of the courtyard. The sun dipped low, painting the sky gold and rose. "Do you ever think she's watching?" Tunde asked. "Every day," Chuka said. "Sometimes I catch myself turning to tell her something before remembering she's not here." "She's here," Tunde said quietly. "Just lighter than air." Chuka smiled at that. "You sound like her now." "I'm trying to." They watched the first stars appear, small and fearless. "You know," Chuka said after a long silence, "I used to think legacy meant towers and companies. But now when I look around, this is it. A garden that keeps blooming. And you," Tunde said, "finally learned to rest." Chuka laughed. "Rest, my brother, we're just beginning." 2 weeks later, work began on the expansion. Teams traveled to Kumasi and Tamale, guided by former foundation students who now led training programs. News crews documented the transformation, calling it a new blueprint for African community development. Tunde split his time between sites, sleeping little but smiling much. He met mayors, pastors, and market women who donated bags of maize for the new kitchens. He told them stories of Mama Ifeoma, how one act of compassion had grown into a network of light stretching across the nation. In Kumasi, he stood before a group of young apprentices hammer in hand, teaching them how to build tables. One boy asked, "Sir, were you always rich?" Tunde chuckled. "No, my friend, but I've been wealthy in other ways." How the boy pressed. "Because someone believed I was worth saving," he said simply. The boy nodded slowly. "Then I'll believe that about someone else one day." That, Tunde said, tapping his chest, is how the chain never breaks. Months passed. The foundation's first regional center opened under bright skies and drums of celebration. Mothers wept, fathers danced, children shouted their names into the world. Reporters wrote headlines that glowed, "The Ifeoma Legacy: How One Family's Pain Rebuilt a Nation's Hope." One evening back at the main campus, Chuka gathered the staff for a private dinner. Candles flickered across the tables, reflecting in everyone's eyes. "I've decided," he announced, "to step back from business completely. The board of Okoro Holdings can survive without me. The foundation cannot." Gasps filled the room. "I'm dedicating the rest of my life to this work," he continued. "And I want to register it officially as a trust with equal leadership between Tunde and me." Tunde's voice cracked. "You'd give up everything for this," Chuka smiled. "I'm not giving up anything. I'm finally keeping something that matters." The table erupted in applause, and Amara, now 11, raised her glass of juice. "To Grandma Ifeoma, the woman who built forever," everyone echoed the toast. That night, long after the celebration ended, Tunde walked alone to the mural. He knelt, tracing the inscription beneath her painted face. "Home is where someone stays for you." The moonlight shimmered against the paint, and for a moment, he could almost hear her voice again. "You stayed, my son, and now others will too." Tunde closed his eyes. "Rest now, Mama. We'll take it from here." Behind him, the compound glowed, dormitories alive, with laughter, classrooms buzzing with dreams. Somewhere a child played his harmonica badly, but with joy, the melody wobbling but sincere. And as the first light of dawn touched the roofs of the foundation, it seemed to whisper across the land, through every city, every heart, every memory that had once known darkness. Kindness does not die. It simply changes hands. In that moment, the story of the Okoro family and the boy from the storm became more than history. It became a living promise that no matter how fierce the rain, there will always be those who stay, who build, who believe. And so the house that kindness built never slept again. It kept its lights on for every lost soul who came knocking.